Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Chariwag, Assistant Professor at the Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. Today we are going to discuss a module titled Theoretical Debates and Overview, which is under the paper Agrarian Social Structure and Change that has been coordinated by Dr. Manish Thakur, IIM Kolkata. In this module, we are going to develop a understanding of the diverse approaches to the study of agrarian social structure and the changes that has taken place. Further, we will also develop a synoptic view of the theoretical debates and perceptions in the study of agrarian studies. Further, we will also look into the development of capitalism in agriculture that has posed a challenge on the way to understand agrarian change and structures within India. Further, we will make a distinction and analysis of different Marxist and non-Marxist positions, especially in terms of category of analysis of agrarian structures and change in India. Diverse approaches. The agrarian question in India has been approached through diverse theoretical standpoints. Many social scientists are of the opinion that Marxist class analysis is not a suitable theoretical framework for understanding of Indian agrarian and social structure. In general, one finds two types of arguments regarding the limitations or rather inapplicability of Marxist categories to the agrarian question in India. Indian society is a complex society where capitalist and pre-capitalist features coexist. Therefore, it is not amenable to a two-class scheme underlying the concept of the mode of production. Remnants of bonded labor and Jajmani system point towards the capitalist features in Indian countryside. One can attribute this to the line of arguments to the late K. N. Raj. The institution of caste remains in vital importance in India. Caste is not always coterminous with class, and at times caste may even be more important than class in explaining the existing social structure and its dynamics. We keep hearing ad nauseum that caste as an institution is unique to India, and this institution, far from withering away with the advent of modernity as many believed, has demonstrated a tremendous capacity for survival and adaptation. Besides, one can discern the elements of a third approach in the writings of Utsa Patnaik. According to her, the complexity of socio-economic situation in India calls for the use of Marxian tools for analysis given the social formation and the processes of change within it. She lays emphasis on the character of the pre-capitalist economy at the time of British conquest and the impact of colonial rule in altering that structure. Further, this type of argument highlights the fact that state-promoted capitalist industrialization has expedited the process of replacement of pre-capitalist relations of production by capitalist ones. In the field of agrarian relations, this view emphasizes on the absence of a concerted attack on the total abolition of feudal forms of production and exploitation. Likewise, it underlines the character of the changes which tends to promote capitalist production in the wake of land reforms and green revolution. The ultimate argument is that continuing capitalist transformation of Indian agrarian structure can very well be grasped in a Marxist framework. In a related vein, the Marxist historian D.D. Kosambi extends the mode of production framework to ancient India as well. According to him, the origin and historical function of caste in India cannot be understood without an analysis of its economic basis, and hence changes in the caste system itself through the nearly 2 millennia of its existence must be necessarily related to the transitions from one mode of production to other. He traces the origins of caste to the Aryan transition from pastoralism to a food-producing economy in the late Vedic and post-Vedic times in conjunction with the conquest and exploitative assimilation of the non-Aryan tribes. In his reading, the long-drawn transition to food production was marked by a parallel transition from tribe to caste. Kosambi argues the specific character of caste system and its ideological counterpart, Hindu religion, reflecting tribal acculturation as well as the centralized absolute monarchies from Maurya to Gupta periods, were necessitated by the material requirements of expanding food production in a hostile environment. The subsequent endless proliferation of subcaste or jatis and the ever-growing Hindu pantheon of gods and goddesses reflected the developing division of labor within settled villages combined with the continued acculturation of the tribal elements. Tribal endogamy and commensality was now continued as a caste endogamy and commensality within the new food-producing economy. Even today, in the few tribal pockets, as food gatherers and shifting cultivators find their former environmental being destroyed, they are integrated into the established village as outcasts performing labor for others or as yet inferior subcaste. Exploitative integration of aboriginal food gatherers into a food producing economy. The question of class structure. Following from the above, and expectedly much of the scholarly discussions in agrarian sociology have revolved around the economic and social characteristics of classes in rural India. A large number of economists, sociologists in India have contributed to these theoretical debates on the basis of both ethnographic field studies and large-scale survey data. We will attempt to give you a flavor of such scholarly endeavors in what follows. In one of the earlier studies of agrarian class structure, Ramakrishna Mukherjee in his 6 villages of Bengal classified households under different categories on the basis of household occupation. Mukherjee notes economic differentiation, decline of average size of holdings, except among landlords and professionals, slow disintegration of middle group of self-employed, peasants and artisans, and swelling of the ranks of bagardars, that is sharecroppers, laborers, and the destitute. Employing Marxian framework, Mukherjee poses the following classification of different agrarian classes: Jotdar and big ryots, rich farmer, ryot, non-cultivating owner, petty employer, rentier, artisan, ryot, bagar. In other instance, Andre Bethe in his much talked about monograph Caste, Class, Power, Changing Patterns of Stratification in a Tanjore village focuses on the organization of production, that is, the relations which are entered into by the members of the village among themselves and outsiders for the purpose of production. Essentially explores the agrarian class structure of the village. Concerned for class system is a system of social relations entered for the purpose of production as manifest in a given productive organization. Since the economy of the village is primarily based upon agriculture, the relations of production consist of relations between categories of persons contributing in different ways to the process of agriculture. Viewed thus, he puts forth threefold class structure: landowners, tenants, and laborers. Yet this way of looking at agrarian classes confirms Marx's understanding of class. As a consequence, Bethe has been criticized for deployment of the threefold class stratification as juridical descriptive categories and not as analytical categories. The fact of owning land or the fact of cultivating leased in land does not by itself confer class status in the Marxist term. What does define class status sense is whether the producer exploits the laborer of others through obtaining profit, rent, or other means, or whether the cultivator is self-employed or whether he or himself is exploited. A landowner can belong to any of the several distinct classes in the Marxian sense. He may be poor peasant or landlord. In much of the same vein, a tenant can also be a poor peasant, a small peasant, rich, middle peasant, or capitalist. Although Bethe clarifies that landowners and tenants constitute distinct entities only as a conceptual category, not as a concrete group of individuals. One and the same person may be and not infrequently is both an owner of land and a tenant on somebody else's land. It is essential to appreciate this multiple class affiliation, since because of it one and the same person is often pulled by conflicting interests in different directions. This has the general consequences of preventing class interests from becoming sharply focused and classes from being clearly ranged against each other. Even otherwise, Bethe considered 3 types of factors which have had the effect on agrarian hierarchy: market forces, government measures such as land reforms, minimum wages, and political action. Market forces have brought about changes in the association between caste and land ownership in most parts of the country, whatever may be the pace of such changes. Way back in the 1950s, F.G. Bailey in Caste and Economic Frontier noted the marketization of land in Orissa. Once land came into the market, it was common for some castes whose members did not own any land in the past to be able to buy it. Concomitantly, there was a decrease in the percentage of land owned by the traditional landowning caste. In fact, in the 19th century, it was fairly easy to discern a high degree of correspondence between caste and agrarian hierarchy. For example, in Bethe's field village of Sripuram, Brahmins were landowners and non-Brahmins were generally the tenants, and Adi Dravidas were the laborers. This symmetry started getting dented once the Brahmins started selling land and non-Brahmins started buying it. Also, the Adi Dravidas took to tenancy. This is the case of movement from harmonic sort of inequalities to disharmonic ones. That is, a change from the system of cumulative inequalities to one of the dispersed inequalities, or from a relatively closed to relatively open system of stratification. Indisputably, there are two trends that can be discerned: transfer of land from landowning to cultivating caste, a concentration of land within a single caste, for example, Vokaligas in Karnataka. In general, whenever land was held by castes such as Brahmins or Kshatriya castas, they have often sold it and moved to the cities in search of careers in professions or services. They have always been the non-cultivating owners. Wherever it was held by those who were cultivators by traditions such as Jats, or whose traditions did not lead to urban employment such as Rajputs, they have retained it and in some cases strengthened their control over land. Coming of land into the market does not mean that it will not come to be more widely distributed among different castes. More often than not, it could be a case of land being bought and sold by members of the same caste. There is little evidence of land being bought by the lower caste in a big way. One also comes across a reverse process where the transfer of land is from the small holders to large proprietors. However, one should not forget that the owner is socially superior and the tenant is socially inferior. Likewise, tenants are socially superior as compared to laborers, and Jaws would prefer to be sharecroppers than laborers. Beyond class, Chainov and agrarian populism. Even as there have been large number of studies inspired by Marxian framework, there has always been the contending tradition of agrarian populism pioneered by Chainov. Chainovian understanding of the peasant economy subsequently informed dominant anthropological understanding of peasant society and culture. We present below some of the salient aspects of Chainov's agrarian populism. Peasant economy involves an intrinsic social relation, self-exploitation of the labor power. The measure of self-exploitation is in the number of days in the year which the peasant compels himself to work. The inequalities within peasant society spring from this subjective relation and do not involve exploitation of some people by the other. Peasant economy reproduces itself through the family. The family is the progenitor of family cycle and of population growth. It is the owner of property. As such, it expresses the fact that the aim of production is household consumption, not feudal rent or bourgeois profit. In other words, peasant world signifies subsistence motivation and static economy. Peasant economy embodies a contradiction between human needs and the forces of production. And this is what generates the laws of motion of both household and economy, which propels agricultural production towards more highly developed system of cultivation and more valuable products. But this contradiction is not antagonistic. Not only is the scale of peasant production technically appropriate, it is also more appropriate, more efficient, more competitive than capitalist production. Peasants do not earn a profit where capitalists go bankrupt. Peasants survive. In sum, Chainov had a definite theory of relationship between peasant labor power and means of production. It was based on a non-social view of human nature, sometimes utilitarian man who exercises choice and whose behavior is analyzed as a set of revealed preferences. Sometimes man as an agent who determines the goal of his own labor, in the sense of production for the sake of consumption, and sometimes quite specifically for the state of subsistence. Chainov belonged to the neo-populist tradition, Russian populist tradition in social science and the rural statistical, agronomic and extension work, which can be dated roughly from the turn of the century. The neo-populist tradition stressed the viability of peasant agriculture and its ability to survive and prosper under any circumstances. For the peasantry had no necessary tendency to develop the increasing economic inequalities and class antagonisms of bourgeois industrial society. There was no tendency to create increasing rich groups of rich and poor or landless peasants with a more and more unstable group of middle peasants in between. The village was an overwhelmingly homogeneous community, able constantly to reproduce itself both economically and socially. Consequently, China saw the modernization of traditional small farming as lying along neither a capitalist nor a socialist road, but as a peasant path of raising the technical level of agricultural production through agricultural extension work and cooperative organization, at the same time conserving the peasant institutional framework of the family smallholding. Existence of personal bonds in agricultural communities. In continuance, Scholars of the agrarian scene in India have often debated the ramifications of the continuous decline or disappearance of personal ties binding different groups and classes which are engaged in agriculture. Personal ties of dominance and dependence, such money system, customary obligations on the parts of the landlords and landless laborers, and similar and other non-contractual and personal bonds have historically characterized the life of the agricultural communities in India and elsewhere. Face-to-face group, close-knit social networks, social life centered within community have given rise to the complex social relations among the various constituents of agricultural communities. Kinship, caste, locality, and the values of paternalism weigh heavily on purely economic relations. In certain sense, horizontal links of kinship and caste very often temper the vertical hierarchy based on ownership and of control of land. Of course, there is no denying that there has been a decline of the communitarian dimensions in recent times, and the personal bonds have been reorganized to a large extent. Therefore, one finds the interpenetration of two systems in the countryside: patronage-based morality and instrumental rationality and contractual relations. One may not find the presence of conscious identity like that of the zamindars or Brahmins at the top, but there is the identity of material interest reflected in the unity of caste and class interest. There has hardly been an agreement among scholars of the Indian scene if inequalities of wealth, power, and status emanate from the caste to caste. We know for certain that social inequality has both material and non-material ideological aspects, and there is mutual reinforcement between the two. The revived sociological wisdom has been to reiterate the axiom that the class inherits caste and caste inherits class. However, there is no doubt that the distribution of land in India has been the most important material base of inequality. As Meridel rightly remarked, inequality is in fact mainly a question of land ownership, with which are associated leisure, enjoyment of status, and authority. The fact remains that a small class of people own and control much of the land, while a large number of people sit at the bottom of the agrarian pyramid as landless agricultural laborers. In between, there exists a wide variety of tenancy relations. This inequality in the material domain is coexistent with a host of other inequalities. The truth remains, though, as Bailey argues, that there are many kinds of relationships that can be studied independently of caste. For example, the ownership and control of land and relations deriving from it. But then, even in these studies, caste and not individuals and groups are taken as units of interaction. In general, the study of social classes in India has not received the same direct attention that has been given to caste in India. One could say that the categories such as landlords, owner cultivators, tenant cultivators, and agricultural laborers are in terms in which an Indian villager thinks, acts, are not exhausted by caste. Who owns how much land is equally a relevant question in a society where land is highly concentrated among some caste groups and is in short supply among others. Of course, Marxist scholars have emphasized the fact that wealth, power, and privilege in a rural setting are invariably associated with land ownership. Thus, Daniel Thorner came up with his threefold classification of agrarian hierarchy in terms of Malik, Kisan, Mazdoor. The stress here is on land as a fundamental basis of social coverage. On the whole, agrarian relations in India reveals complex and diverse pictures with curious mixtures of values and practices deriving from caste, customs, community traditions, market, and state. According to P.C. Joshi, the complexity of agrarian structure can be segregated as follows. There are areas where absentee landlordism still persists in various guises. There are areas of non-cultivating landlordism, open or disguised. There are areas of change from over non-cultivating landlordism to commercially oriented landlordism or large-scale farming by landlords. There are areas of transfer of land from landlords to a section of peasantry and the emergence of a kulak economy. There are areas of predominance of self-employed small and middle peasants. There are areas of landlessness are distinguished from areas of aged laborer. At all events, economic change cannot be adequately understood in isolation from social framework within which it takes place. In India, economic organization has a lower degree of autonomy. It is closely intermeshed with a variety of social institutions, caste, kinship, and locality, whose functions are partly economic and partly non-economic. Major changes in economic activity also involve changes in values of social organization. Ideally, modernization leads to a decline in the values of hierarchy and sees the growth of an impersonal structure of organizations, values, and norms. In India, historically speaking, there has been a remarkable association between caste or caste-like organization and the agrarian way of life. Agriculture is not merely an economic enterprise, it has been a way of life with characteristic forms or patterns of values and organizational configurations. Land is not only a means of production, it is a cultural asset as well, having symbolic value, determining one's status in the hierarchy. Naturally, one has to factor in the social setting where agricultural operations takes place. In a village or rural social system, in general, caste has been important in the social system, centering on agricultural production, especially the control and use of land. Land and property income has become the objective basis of traditional hierarchy, whereas caste system has provided ideological justification for social inequality. There has also been an inverse relationship between land ownership and manual labor. Status consideration, style of life, and cultural norms associated with certain status groups have ensured that high caste groups remain distant from the actual business of cultivation. Thus, Indian agrarian structure presents a curious amalgamation of agrarian hierarchy and hierarchy of caste. In a way, we can think of three approaches to the understanding of agrarian change. For us, agrarian change means change in the total systems of relationships obtaining in agrarian economies and societies. These systems include technological and environmental factors and relationships as well as socio-cultural ones. System approaches. This approach touches environmental, technological, and democratic factors and seeks to explain their interrelationships with the farming systems. They perceive agrarian system as of interdependent socio-economic elements geared to the dictates of the family calendar and with inbuilt mechanisms to ensure its survival in the face of recurrent natural hazards. The peasant communities are represented as stable systems. Many features of the peasant economy and society may be understood as mechanisms which function in such a way as to share resources to prevent the development of gross inequalities and thus roughly to maintain a state of equilibrium with the community as a whole. The natural environment supplies one set of factors affecting the agrarian systems of more immediate and direct relevance, and these and the way they work are intimately related to technologies employed by the people in making use of natural resources. Demographic factors and the density of population and the trends of population growth are also likely to affect these relationships. The difficulty with such approaches to the study of agrarian societies is that because they emphasize the systemic quality of local community regulated by values, they can only really explain change as something that comes about as a result of external forces acting upon the local community. The Scarlett Epstein's famous study of economic development and social change in South India describes and explains the contrasting responses in two villages to the development of an irrigation system by the state. Here, the villages are held to be encapsulated by wider society of the state. It is an approach that both ignores the relationship of mutual determination between localities and state in which each exercise some determining influence on the other, and neglects processes of change which may be integral to the peasant society. Decision-making models. This approach is concerned with the allocation of resources on the farm and with the farmers' responses to the markets and innovations. Individuals are seen as making choices about their values and actions as thus are changing their own societies. It takes cognizance of the concept of entrepreneurship, and this approach is good at explicating the success or failure of the individual within the system, but the system itself is left out of analysis. Socio-historical approaches. This approach starts with the examination of the production system itself. They are thus concerned with the interrelationship of people and natural environment and with the interrelationship of people in the process of production. In fact, natural environment is also seen as a creation of interactions of people and physical environment over historical time. This approach places ownership and control of resources as the center of analysis. Incorporation of the small-scale producers into the market, and whereby instead of producing mainly for their own use or satisfy the requirements of those with political authority, small producers begin to produce for exchange and thus come to depend upon purchasers for at least some of the things they require. The process of commoditization and the development of capitalism, or the linking up of rural households producers with capitalist production in various ways, is perhaps the dominant process of change in contemporary agrarian societies. This approach is thus concerned with the relationships between expanding capitalism and other non- or pre-capitalist forms of production. One school of thought holds that it is the very nature of capitalism to absorb or abolish other forms of mode of production. Other scholars argue that there are often circumstances in which capitalism does not destroy other forms or modes of production, that they speak of the articulation of capitalism with other modes of production. Articulation means that there is some intervention by the social practices of capitalism within those of the other modes of production and vice versa. The approach also seeks to grasp the relationship between whole and the part in such a way as to comprehend the mutual determination. It particularly considers the relationships between agrarian society and the rest of the state of which it is a part. In this module on theoretical debates and overview, we have discussed about how challenging it is to study and analyze and come to a particular one conclusion with regard to agrarian structures and change in India. We have discussed wide variety of theoretical approaches to the study. Further, because of the fact that within Indian agrarian structure, there is a wide variety of tenancy relations, it is extremely challenging to scholars. Further, in this module, we have also understood and engaged with the idea that study of social class has not fully developed, especially within the agrarian structure. And at the end, we have focused on the way agrarian hierarchy and hierarchy of caste are so closely interlinked that it poses a challenge to scholars studying agrarian structure and change in India. Thank you.